Hi everyone, this is Steve Haskin, and this tutorial is about the mechanics of making a time-lapse movie in Photoshop. And yes, Photoshop extended, and it has to be extended, can make movies. It's actually a video editor in a way, and it has some additional features that you don't have in Premiere Pro, and there's another tutorial with using Premiere Pro to make a time-lapse movie. There are advantages and disadvantages, which I'll go through as we go through this. When you're making a time-lapse movie, you can do this. So I'm going to assume, first of all, that you've got your time-lapse images already shot, and you've got your sequence shot. We have to make that assumption. This is not about the mechanics of shooting time-lapse. This is about the mechanics of taking all those images that you shot individually and making them into a time-lapse. So this red square represents, this great big giant red square represents a 14 megapixel sensor. And the reason I know that is because I actually took it from the camera that has a 14 megabit sensor, and it's the same dimensions. The small turquoisey light blue, or whatever that is, light blue in the center of the screen, this represents an HD image. This is HD video. 1920 pixels across is the dimension here by 1080 high. And you can see pretty much that this leaves you a lot of room to either shrink the image or crop the image. You don't have to do it because Photoshop will allow you to do it. For the purposes of this demonstration and tutorial, I've already cropped some images down to 1920 by 1080. They are in HD format. However, we're going to be doing this for e-learning, so it's going to be a little bit different. So if you have Photoshop open, and this is CS6, CS5 works with all the techniques that I'm using here as well, or there was no CS 5.5, I guess, but CS5 will work as well. But the timeline will appear. It's very easy to create your the first part of your film, and that is just I double click when I want to open something in a brand new instance of Photoshop. I just double click anywhere in the gray, and look at that, it just popped open to the cropped JPEGs for ASTD technology. And all I have to do is select the first image, and then right down here there's a little checkbox where you can do image sequence. Now, couple of caveats here. These images have to be in order. You notice that this is underscore DSC001 in sequence. Your camera, whether it's a point and shoot or a DSLR, whatever it is, it will take the images in sequence. It's up to you to just move them in. They will be taken as you need to take them as JPEGs. They will be brought in to the native size format. If you want to do some processing in Lightroom, that's fine. The only processing that I did in Lightroom, I've done no other processing at all, and the only processing I've done is I crop them down to a size. That's fairly easy to do. So as long as I have this box checked off and I have the first image selected, I can click on open, and it will ask me for my frame rate. I'm just going to leave it at the default of 30, and now it will open the image, and notice at the bottom Photoshop automatically opens up this timeline. That's a Photoshop timeline. So I'm just going to scroll back this image just a little bit. It doesn't need to fill the screen. So now what we have is, and I'm going to just scrub, this is called scrubbing when you go back and forth. You probably already know that. But I'm just going to scrub back and forth here a little bit, and I'm going to just show you what's going on. Now, if you notice, there's a little green bar here above the image above this timeline here, right above the daemon for the image, above the timeline. And that green bar is where the image has been rendered, at least to memory, for Photoshop. And I can pretty much drag it across, but look what happens. Do you see that? It starts breaking up, and I'll show you that even better. If you notice right down here, it says 30 frames a second, which is the speed that I set. And it's playing at 30 frames a second until I start rendering. And now it's rendering at just under 10 frames a second. So let's say approximately 1/3 speed. So I'm just going to stop the render right here. I just hit the space bar again to stop the render. And you can see that I've already got this nice and it's already nice and rendered. And it plays just fine at 30 frames a second in HD. And I'm just going to check just so that you can see. I'm going to do Control-Alt-I. And you can see that this is 1920 by 1080 and 72 dpi, and it's just fine. Now, let's say that I want to get very artsy. This is where Photoshop just shines for making time lapse. If I want to get very artsy, I can go to Filter, and I can select a filter. I'm going to do one that makes big changes to the image, and it's called Topaz Simplify. And what it does is it takes all kinds of details and simplifies it. So I'm going to just select this ghostly neutral image, and you notice now when I click in the middle of their dialog box, it does that. See that? That's the original image, and that's just it's totally and completely simplified. So I'm going to click on OK. Now, here's the problem in Photoshop. The first problem, and that is that I haven't done anything to this image other than apply a filter. It does not apply a filter to the entire timeline. If you notice, I go to the next frame and there's no filter on it. So you have a couple of choices here. You can, I'm going to go back to open here. You can, so my choices are as follows. I can either add it a frame at a time, in which case there are 999 instances of frames that I have to add, or the other choice that I've got is I can create a daemon of the image. So the easiest way to do that, and remember this is for e-learning, and most of you are going to use Articulate, or you're going to use, even if you're using Flash, you're going to use some kind of a container, and most e-learning containers right now want to use Articulate in particular has a very weird file size. It goes 640 by 480. I don't know why. Most standard definition video is 720 by 480. But if I do Control-Alt-C, I can look at the canvas and I can see that it is 1920 by 1080. So I'm going to change it to the articulate size, which is 640 by 480. Click on OK, and it's going to say Photoshop's canvas size is smaller. Yes, we know this. Okay, so I'm going to proceed. So now I've cropped and clipped the image down to the canvas size, but I don't like where it is, and I don't like how big that whole thing is. And I could just go like that and move it around, but I can do some more fun things than that, because I can do Control-T. Oh, it comes up with a new dialog box. So it needs to be a smart object. That's the smart image. So I'm going to convert this to a smart image. And you'll notice down here, it's going to change the icon. And there we go. And I've now got a new icon that's a smart image. And since I hit Transform, which is Control-T, I can do that. So I unconverted it. I'll convert it again. And I think that I'm going to shrink this down a little bit. And if you hold down the Shift key, it'll keep things in proportion, which is what we want to do. And I thought that the sky was the most interesting thing that was going on here. So I'm going to move that up like that. And I'm going to get back down here and grab these handles a little bit. And I'm going to kind of move that up like that. So I've got the sky, and it's done. So now I've got a 640 by 480 image. And if I scrub across it the same way as before, the skies become the focus of the image. But it's a little low on contrast, and it's also kind of washed out a little bit. So I'm going to add an adjustment layer. And I'm going to add a levels layer, actually, is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to take this image and I'm going to squish it up. I'm going to get it a little bit darker because I can. Actually, because I want it to be a little more contrasty. And I've now got levels, and I've got them set where I want. So that's good. So I've got the levels kind of set where I want. Let's see if there's anything else that's interesting in this, anything more interesting in here that could make this kind of an interesting thing to do. I think that was fine. Just Control-Z back to the sky. The sun was striking that side of the mountain a little bit. But you'll notice now that I've got this, and I can drag it across, and I've changed the levels on this. So let me pop out the history, And notice that if I go back and forth to the modify layers level, I've really given it a lot more punch. So now I want to add an artsy-fartsy filter. Artsy-fartsy filters are nice things. I'm just going to filter, and I'm going to go back to that Topaz Simplify just so that we can see something. That there's the last use settings. That's what we've got. I'm going to click on OK. Okay, there you go. So it's now in there, and you can see I've got a levels adjustment and I've got smart filters on there. And the smart filters mean that it hasn't done any destructive things. Look how dark that made the sky up on the top. But most importantly, the thing that you need to know is that now I can go down a couple of frames, and you're going to see that this just, and I've got, see that it's moved off the first one, and that's done. So let's say I'm done with this image. I'm very satisfied with it, and maybe it's a little bit too contrasty here, so I'm going to click on the levels again and look at these levels. Maybe it just needs a little bit of lightening here. So I'll go back into it. I don't want it to be too light, but then again, I don't want it to be too dark. That's pretty good. So I'll do that. Now I've got it. It's all artsy-fartsy. I like it. Now comes the hard part, or actually the time-consuming part. It's all relatively easy up to this point. I've made a smart object out of the layer. I have added a filter to it, but you're going to see now that I can go to File, and I can export this, and I can export this by going to Render Video. Very easy to do. And it's going to pop open a dialog box, and it's going to ask me to do this, so I'm going to call this ASTD test image test time lapse. And I'm going to put it on my desktop, and I'm going to do it as an H.264. I'm going to do it at high quality. I'm going to do it at the document size. I'm going to do it at 30 frame rates, progressive fields. I don't need to do anything. I'm not going to do anything. The document is square pixels. I'm going to leave it like that, and I'm going to do all the frames. And as soon as I click on render, you're going to notice something happen. And this is the major disadvantage of Photoshop. This file, you notice that it says the plugin is processing the image. And what it's doing is it's taking each frame, it's rendering the levels of each frame, and it's rendering in one pass, and then the second pass it applies the filter to the frame. So this is going to take just roughly, I'm thinking this is going to take probably a half hour, 45 minutes. And all you need to do is you need to walk away from the machine, or plan on doing overnight if it's more than 30 seconds. This was a 30-second or 33-second shot because 30 frames a second, there's 999 frames, or 998. That's close enough to 33 seconds for folk music. So I can't actually hit cancel here because if you'll see, Topaz Simplify it says the plugin is processing the image. If I hit cancel, it won't do it. So we're going to come back after this is done, and it's all done exporting, and we'll be ready to go. Okay, we're back, and you can see this took about a half an hour, and you can see that the image is like this. And I'm going to append the video of this time lapse at the end of this session so that you can watch it if you want. But the downsides of doing this in Photoshop are obviously that it just takes forever to render. It's much easier to render if you're using Premiere Pro. But the upsides are that Premiere Pro can't do these kinds of filters either. And I mean, this was just simple filters, not meant to do anything per se, but to show you how long it takes. So 30 seconds of video took about a half an hour to render. So, call it roughly a minute a second of rendering, which would look like, let's say, 2 frames a second or so. So there you have it. this is how you make time-lapse movies using Photoshop and a sequence of frames or a sequence of images that you shot using your camera to create that. And I will see you on the Premiere Pro side, or if you watch the Premiere Pro one first, I will see you on the Photoshop side.